interesting.
That is just plain water in case anybody's interested. Okay, for those of you that are joining, we might ask to check to make sure that your microphones are in fact muted for us, please.
Well, Gene, I've got 7 o'clock, so Susan, you ready? Okay, Gene, you ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But I guess we'll go ahead and start. Want to thank you guys all for being on tonight. My name is Patrick Davis, and I'm a regional livestock field specialist with University of Missouri Extension. Basically, I work with Gene Schmitz tonight and Susan Jaster, and we're going to do a sheep and goat production workshop. And so Gene's going to talk about he's a livestock specialist up in Benton County, and he's going to talk about parasite management. And then Susan Jaster later will talk about grazing management, and then I think she's going to incorporate a little bit of parasite management in as well. And that's and she works with Lincoln University as a small farm outreach specialist. And so again, want to thank you all for being on tonight. Earlier today, I tried to send you, I sent you the PDFs of the PowerPoints that they're going to be given tonight. I also sent you a web link to a Qualtrics survey. If you would please, sometime after this evening, fill that survey out. The survey is related to the workshop tonight. If you'd fill that out electronically, it's anonymous, and you just fill it out, and I get the information back. So if you just please do that. Let's see, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah, please keep your mics muted and your video off, unless you're presenting, obviously, because that we might, so we don't have issues with pulling down too much bandwidth or anything, or issues with noises during the talks or anything. But the video, the presentation is recorded, and so after the recordings, after tonight, I will send the recording out in a YouTube video. I'll work with the guy who did the registration, the online registrations, and he'll send that out to everybody who registered. So you will get that. I'll do that tomorrow. Just if you have any questions or anything tonight, just put those in the chat. It's basically the little chat button down here at the bottom. You can put those questions in the chat, and I will monitor that, and hopefully, and as we get questions, we'll try to get those answered. And so, again, want to thank you for being on tonight, and I think I've talked enough for now. Gene, I think I'll turn it over to you, and you can go ahead and start. And if there's any questions come in, we'll let you know.
Okay, we'll see if I can get this up and going. All right, is my slideshow up?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right. Well, again, welcome everybody. I hope you enjoy what we've got put together for you this evening. Again, as Patrick said, I'm a livestock field specialist up at Sedalia, Central Missouri. So I'm going to focus a bit on internal parasite management for sheep and goats. The things we want to visit about are a bit in detail on the barber pole worm, because that's one that's pretty specific to areas and is fairly important parasite that we have to deal with. I want to spend a little time dealing with some dewormer resistance, dewormer use, and some other management. So the other thing I might mention is try not to spend a lot of time worrying about taking notes or any of that kind of stuff. Patrick he said, did send out the PDF files, and there's a website that I've pulled really most of this information off of, and I'll make sure that you have the opportunity to write that link down. So that's really going to be the most important piece. And actually what I've done is taken most of this talk from bits and pieces and summarized information that I found on that wormx.info website. So we'll go ahead and get into it and kind of deal with the barber pole worm first. It's a parasite that affects sheep, goats, deer, exotic animals, ruminants. It is a blood-sucking worm. It's highly pathogenic and causes anemia in severe cases. We also get the bottle jaw, tissue or fluid leaking out of the tissues in the jaw. We'll see some pictures of that. And it is really the big major parasite that we run into when we are raising sheep and goats in warm wet environments in the southern US. It's such a problem because it did evolve in the tropics and thrives in warm wet climates. It has a very long transmission season, especially in the southern US. It can run from maybe April to October. It has also a very short life cycle. When conditions are right, we can get generation turnover in 3 weeks or less. And so again, a long season, short life cycle, we can produce a lot of eggs and larvae and worms in a very short period of time. Our animals really only develop partial immunity or slow immunity, and then there are specific times too that we get immunity that wanes, particularly around the time of lambing. So there are some specific times that we need to pay attention to that. The big issue, or one of the big issues, and other than the fact that it is a blood-sucking parasite, is the fact that it produces so many worms a day. Just huge numbers of eggs that get produced by these adults. And so with, 300 worms or so, you can get huge numbers of eggs per day per animal deposited out on pastures. And so that's one of the reasons it's such an issue for us. We need to understand a little bit about the life cycle of the worm, and we'll start out with the adult worm here that's in the intestine of the animal. Again, it is a blood-sucking worm, and you see a picture of the worm here that I'm kind of running my my arrow over that hopefully you'll see. So they'll lay those eggs in the feces. It's deposited in the fecal pellets. Under a microscope, that is what those eggs look like. They develop in 3 stages into larval phases that eventually become an infective larva stage, which we see here in the bottom picture. At that stage, then the worms travel up forage or plants 2 or 3 inches, maybe not very high, and they don't go very far from where they're deposited, but they do elevate themselves just a little bit. And so then the infective larvae are then ingested by the animal, and then either go ahead and develop into adult nematodes or go into this state of arrested development, which we'll talk about in a minute. But that's really kind of important to understand, that the cycle of how things work, particularly how these larvae get ingested. Again, this can be a process that takes maybe 3 weeks or so from start to finish, from the time that eggs are deposited until we get adult nematodes hatch back in the GI tract and laying eggs. Or it could take several many weeks or months, depending on the environment. So again, that's the basic life cycle that we need to understand and have an idea of what's going on in our animals. Again, these life cycle can be weeks to months. Typically, too, after droughts, we can see outbreaks, again, because of the effects of environment and how these larvae go ahead and develop after they've been deposited on pastures. We can get huge numbers of these infective larvae, particularly then growing up these forages on new growth after droughts, and a lot of times animals will be hunting something green, so we can get lots and lots of ingestion of worms that are infective larvae at that point. The ingested larvae do develop or can develop this arrested development in the host until the environment becomes right for the larva to survive and develop. So they do have this feature that can make it a bit challenging as well. Again, this is something that happens in the animals with those infective larvae. So that's a critical piece for control of these. The other thing that we do see during late gestation, early lactation is a relaxation of immunity prior to birthing or lambing. And so this is due in part to protein requirements going up in these females prior to birthing. We also can see protein requirements go up due to high levels of parasitation or parasitism and tissue damage and things like that. So it's important to pay attention to our nutrition, particularly around this late gestation, early lactation standpoint and time frame. And probably if we need to supplement, use something that's high in rumen undegraded protein like distiller's grains or brewer's grains to supplement a little bit of protein if we need to do that. So how does this dewormer resistance develop? And the several factors go into it. One of the big ones is underdosing, in that we just don't get enough product into these animals for the weight that they have. Dosing animals that don't need it is another common factor that causes or can lead to resistance. And then just overuse or overdependence of these things rather than to take some management steps. And so those are the major factors of causing dewormer resistance. And we can check to see if our animals or the parasites are in fact resistant by doing what we call fecal egg count reduction tests. And that's really kind of one of the starting points for some of these things called smart drenching or other aspects of trying to manage this whole parasite issue. We'll pick up some of these other points here in just a second. So I want to talk a minute about these fecal egg count reduction tests. There's something that can be done by producers themselves. You do need some specialized equipment. You need a microscope. You need some slides. There's a bit of a process that you need to go learn and understand and work with. There's also, once you get these things under the microscope, you need to understand and know what it is that you're really looking at. I'm putting my pointer there on some of those barber pole worm larvae, or eggs, I'm sorry. So need to be looking for some of those things and not get confused by pieces of forage or other things that might be in that fecal sample. So producers can do this. Also, there are some labs now that'll do these for about $5 a test. So that price has come down a bit. But the idea behind this fecal egg count reduction test is you do a count before you treat animals. You treat some with a dewormer, then you do another fecal egg count in 7 to 14 days after treatment and determine how much of a decrease in fecal egg count you are seeing between those two treatment periods. And so that's a way to identify if these particular classes of dewormers are working for you or not. So when we look at using dewormers and proper use of those, again, the correct dose is vital, and the dosage is based on weight of the animal. So it's good to have a scale underneath them. We want to administer the stuff correctly. We want to put it at the back of the throat, administer it slowly enough to where the animals can swallow it that they don't spit a lot of it out and some of those kinds of things. There are ways that we can help increase the efficacy a bit by withholding feed. That reduces gut flow or flow of materials in and out of the rumen and GI tract, and so we wind up with a greater exposure time of the worms to the dewormer. So that can be beneficial. In some cases, we can repeat doses. We want to make sure that we don't put newly treated animals out on clean pastures. That just reinfects the pastures. And the other thing that's becoming fairly important is the use of combination dewormers, where we'll use 2 different classes of dewormers at the same time. Here in the U.S., we aren't able to purchase combination dewormers in a single product. We have to purchase these separately and administer them separately with separate syringes. We do it at the same time. Other countries have clearances and products that they do put different classes of products together, so it's just kind of a one product type of a thing, but that's not an option for us here in the US. But the way this whole thing kind of works is, for example, if we have 2 dewormers that are 90% effective, and just for simplicity's sake, we have 100 worms. I give my treatment, and with a 90% success rate, I have 10 worms that are resistant to my dewormer. So I've got 10 worms that are still alive. If I hit these 10 with another product that's 90% effective, I take out 90% of those remaining 10. So I'm left with one worm, or 99% control. So by combining those 2 products, I get 99% control versus using them separately at different times, where I would only get 90% control from either one. So that's the idea behind stacking these things together. As we do get more control, it does delay resistance for a while, but doesn't prevent resistance. It really only kind of delays it. These are kind of the 3 classes that we have. We have the white wormers, the benzimidazoles, we have the nicotinic agonists, and then the macrocyclic lactones. And so again, you can use different combinations of these things. You can use fecal egg reduction, fecal egg count reduction tests to determine the effectiveness of some of these products. And then you can pick the products that you have the least resistance to, stack those on top of each other, and help improve the efficacy of some of your dewormers if you're experiencing some resistance problems. As we're treating with these products, it's important to keep some animals, what we call in refugia, or some animals that have not been exposed to a dewormer. So what that does is allow a portion of that worm population to escape exposure to a dewormer, and provides a pool of susceptible genes to dilute those resistant genes in that particular population. Again, those are ideas that slow wormer resistance. And it's also important to understand that a low level of worms in some animals can keep some immune function going against these parasites. There is a bit of an immune response that's mounted, and so having a lower level that's not harming the animal or the productivity can in some cases be, I hate to use the word beneficial, but it's something that we, again, a low level is not that big of an issue for us to be terribly concerned about. Again, those animals that have good immune system function can, again, provide a lot of that refugia to keep that worm population and the genetics in that worm population susceptible to our deworming products. So how do we go about figuring out which one of these animals or which of these animals kind of need treatment and not, and how do we target that? Well, there's several different terms that's talked about, but they all really look at multiple types of characteristics, if you will. So the eyelids, we check for anemia with the Fumantia scoring. That's for barber pole worms. We look for body condition score changes, poor body condition score. So we need to understand that, and that's for all worms. We look at the rear, the DAG scores, or manure problems around the rectum and on the back of the legs. Again, an indication of brown stomach worm. Bottle jaw, again, is a barber pole worm issue, and then coat condition or nasal discharge, whether we're talking about sheep or goats. These are all things that we can put together in combination with each other to identify, well, this animal, it may be okay without treatment, but this animal definitely does need treatment. The Fumantia, we'll go through that real briefly, is a eyelid score for anemia. It's a 1 to 5 scale. 1 is good. There's blood flow there. White is pale and looking anemic. And we treat 3, 4s, and 5s. And so, again, this is for the barber pole worm only. We want to look at the color inside the lower eyelid right along in here. So this animal, it would appear to be, is probably a 4, I would guess, maybe. And so that's how you go about scoring those. If you're interested in this, there is a online Fumantia class that you can take. We've typically done some of these Fumantia trainings live as well throughout the region. So we may try to do something like that if there's interest, probably next spring as we maybe open up to audiences again. But if you're interested, you can get certified online by going through some of this. And some of the other things that we talked about, condition scoring, again, 1 to 5, 1 is very, very thin, 5 is too fat, and sort of 3 is kind of in the middle. So again, that can kind of tell us a bit of how much parasite pressure we might be having. The bottle jaw certainly, again, is a characteristic of the barber pole worm. The DAG scores, again, are 1 to 5 scale, with 1 being pretty clean, the 5 being pretty filthy. So again, those are other tools that we can use to help identify these animals that are going to be most impacted beneficially by treatment with dewormers. Talking now, moving into some of the more management things that we can kind of deal with. We want to identify and call the most heavily parasitized animals. Those typically are the ones that keep dumping out the most worms back on our pastures and things, and keep reinfecting our flocks and herds. And so if we can identify those and get rid of those, there are, again, benefits of identifying and doing that. We want to be careful in terms of our grazing management, and Susan's going to talk a bit more about this in her presentation, but we want to pay particular attention to browse and grazing heights in particular, and not get too short down into the canopy. Remember, I said that those barber pole worms tend to, or the larvae tend to go up maybe a couple of inches on the plants. And so we certainly want to keep our grazing heights above that. Protein supplementation, we talked about this briefly as well with rumen undegraded protein, especially around birthing times and lactation. Again, that can help not only with that high protein requirement, but also to help animals recover from parasite infestations. One of the things that we eat, a plant that can be beneficial for us is Sericea lespedeza. It contains chemicals called condensed tannins. And when Sericea has been fed at 25 to 50% of the diet, in research, it's shown a decrease in fecal egg counts, an improvement in DAG scores, and reduction of Coccidia oocysts. We do have to pay attention to, because too much Sericea can depress forage intake gains and affect trace mineral concentrations in the liver. So it's something that can have some benefits, but we don't want to go overboard with it. We, again, would look at using this during those times before, prior to, and after stress events, such as perhaps partition and lactation, those kinds of things. Be aware that there's a lot of wild Sericea lespedeza, especially in parts of the state, that can just take over pastures and areas, and so we want to pay attention to that and not let that happen. There, in some parts of the country, though, there are what are called low tannin Sericea lespedeza varieties that people and producers will actually plant and use, and so those are a different kind and a different type of Sericea lespedeza, different varieties, I guess, if you will. So most of the stuff I think that we have growing kind of wild in the ditches and waste areas and things around at least central Missouri, where I'm located, would be the tannin containing types of Sericas, and not the improved varieties that have those low levels or no levels of those condensed tannins. So it's that chemical that is the benefit there. So again, Sericea lespedeza can be a bit of a two-edged sword. But understand that there are limits to how much of that we can feed as well to have some impacts for us. As far as barber pole worms, we can also look at copper wire particles. Those have shown some benefit. We want to make sure that we're using copper oxide, which is a slow release form of copper. Copper sulfate is what's found typically in mineral supplements, is more readily available. So we want the copper oxide for a slow release. You can see the levels there that we can feed for kids or lambs versus the 1 to 2 grams per ewe or doe. Dosing a couple of times during the season for the adult animals, and up to maybe 4 times for those kids or lambs at those lower rates. We can re-administer after about 4 to 6 weeks, once or twice if we need to. The effects are rapid, but they are pretty short-lived. There's some work that's indicated that valbazen and prohibit have increased effectiveness in combination with copper wire particles, so kind of keep that in mind. We want to be careful when we're administering these little boluses, that we don't injure the animals and that type of thing. We don't want to overuse them either. We want to monitor kidney copper levels, those types of things. Again, the requirement for copper and the toxicity level for copper in sheep is very, very close. And so sheep are the ones that we really have to pay attention to with these copper wire particles, and not overdose with that element. New animals that come in, we want to do a fecal egg reduction test and deworm with maybe at least 2 dewormers, but we want to find out, if they're bringing anything that is resistant to the products that are typically used on the farms. And so keep those animals isolated until they get cleaned up and you're not depositing something extra on the pastures and bringing in something that you haven't had an issue with before. As far as sheep, there are some estimated breeding values that we can use to determine some animals are more resistant to some of these parasites than others, and so you can use estimated breeding values to breed up some resistance, some natural resistance in your flocks. There's some herbal treatments out there that haven't proven to be effective. There's a nematode trapping fungus that we'll spend a little bit more time on here in just a minute. If you have animals in barn lot, if you're lambing or kidding in barn lots, keep those free from vegetation, and you want to keep the vegetation free from the edges of the fence line as well. If you've got things, plants, vegetation growing where the animals can get to it. Many times that could be a source of infective larvae. So you do want to make sure that you don't contaminate other feed and water resources, but also make sure that those barn lots are free from vegetation. And there, if that's the case, then again, there's really no way for these animals to ingest those infective larvae. So kind of keep some of that stuff in mind. As far as the bioworma, this is a fairly new product in terms of its place in the market. It's been researched for 15 years or so in various places. It's basically a fungal spore that germinates in the manure, and it germinates, traps, paralyzes, and consumes parasitic larvae that are deposited in the manure pats. And so, or in the manure pellets. So it is effective at reducing the infective stages of parasitic larvae on pasture, but it is not effective against the adult worm loads that are internally within the animals. And so you can use this in conjunction with other management strategies such as fecal egg counts, fecal egg count reduction tests, FAMACHA, those other types of things. The feeding rate and for the product is 1.6 ounces per 100 pounds of body weight. You want to feed it throughout the whole transmission season. It may be June through September in a lot of areas. In some locations, it may be May through October, just again, depending on where you're located within the US. Like to feed for at least 60 days and feed the most susceptible animals. The younger stock are the ones that typically we might have a bit more benefit to that, up to maybe 18 to 24 months of age, or these females that are just birthing that may have that rise in parasite infestations around that time as well. But again, you need to understand this is a daily dosing. There are a couple of places that you can find it. I did some looking last week. Premier One Supplies is a fencing company. They are selling it. I also found a place today, Sheepman Supply Company in Frederick, Maryland, that also supplies the product. It comes in a couple of different sizes. You can buy bulk, well, not necessarily bulk, but more pails than just a single. So they call like 4 or more pails kind of a bulk mailing rate. And so there's shipping costs, at least with Premier on some of these. Probably in the neighborhood of about 50 cents to 60 cents a day, depending on the product that you buy. There is also a product out there that is designed to be mixed with something, and I believe that cost might be a little bit cheaper, but Premier One did not have that product available. So this would be just the cost of this product, and then if there's another supplement that you need to add to that, that cost would be on top of this. And so again, so you're looking at probably a minimum of 60 days of daily feeding, and again, does a very nice job. I mean, there's research that's showing that we're removing 90+ % of the infective larvae off of pastures with these products. And so it is a new tool for us to use, and should not meet up with resistance issues or that type of thing, because it's acting in a different manner. It's impacting those larvae on pasture. And so keep that in mind, and that might be another new tool in your toolbox in dealing maybe with some of these worms and parasites if you're getting resistance to them. So kind of getting to the end of the line here. This is the website that I want you to pay attention to, and if you want to write anything down that I've talked about, write this down. This website, it's wormex.info. and that is a website that's put together by a group called the American Consortium for Small Ruminant Parasite Control. It is the most up-to-date information on parasite control in small ruminants in the country. And so if you want to find out more details on any of the things that I talked about, again, all of the information that I shared this evening came off of sheets from that website. I kind of hit the high points this evening, and there's certainly more detail that can be gotten into, but that is your source for getting information. This ATRA site, atra.ncat.org, topics sheep goats. That is also another pretty good website. It again has more guides, videos, and things of that nature. Is maybe not quite as up to date as the wormex.info site, but again, there's good information there as well. And I would also like to put a shout out to one of my former colleagues, Randy Sainers, actually out in Nebraska with Extension out there at this point, for some of the information that I've used in this presentation as well. So again, keep in mind that wormex.info website. That's kind of your go-to thing. So with that, Patrick, I think I've hit the bottom of the barrel, and I'll be willing to try to answer any questions that might have popped into the screen, or we'll move on to Susan.
Any questions for Gene? I don't have any questions in the chat. Anybody have any questions for Gene? Not seeing any.
Okay, Jessica Marshall, I had a message from you. Said you lost my audio. I apologize about that. I'm guessing that my audio is still okay with others, but so she got it back. So okay, on your end, okay, good enough. Well, you're letting me off easy. So again, appreciate everybody's time, and I'll turn it over to Susan.
Okay, Susan, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, and we'll go ahead and start.
Let's see. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. All right, great. I'm going to start out with a live demonstration here first, since we're going to talk about soil a little bit before we get started on pastures, because regenerative practices are kind of the new hot topic in agriculture right now, and we probably need to talk a little bit about that, so that you can understand kind of where it's coming from. And so let's see, I got to take that off of there first, don't I? Okay, all right, so let me adjust my camera so that I can okay. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about soils being degraded and then healthy soils. So if you don't have healthy soils, you really can't improve your pastures very much. So I'm going to talk a little bit about flour. This is the flour, and this is the bread, 2 slices of bread. And so this is our degraded soil, and this is our healthy soil. And I've really found that through improving my soils, my animals stay healthier throughout the year, and I don't have as many problems. So if you don't know much about soil, it's hard to improve it so that your plants are improving, so that your animals can be healthy. So let's go to the flour here. What is flour? It is the berry from the wheat plant, and the the bran gets sanded off basically, and then they grind the internal part of the kernel down to a fine powder. And so that's what you have, is just a white powder. And what do you get when you have to get bread? Well, you start out with the same product, the flour, but you add some ingredients, and that would be sugar, salt, fat, water, and of course, yeast. And the yeast is what's added to, and yeast is a product that is held dormant so that it's shelf stable when we buy it. And when you add the water, that awakens it, and it helps to raise the bread dough, but it also helps to aggregate all the other ingredients so that you have a product with oxygen in the holes. There's holes and things that that aggregate all those products together. So it's not just a one ingredient, it's many ingredients, and they are basically a living thing. That's why bread molds if you leave it too long. So we're going to make it rain on our flour and our bread. And I have this little rainfall simulator, and all it is a cup with lots of holes drilled in it. Well, poke through it with a pin. And I have some water here, and we're going to pour it through our simulator and watch the flour and see what happens to it. So it's beating up, it's kind of ponding, and then it starts to run off. And I'm going to stop that rain simulator so you can see what's happening. And if you noticed, it does run off, and it gathers flour with it as the water runs off. And it gets a little bit cloudy and murky over here. And so the water is trying to infiltrate, but it really can't do it. There's ponding and running off, which is erosion. And that pulls that topsoil with it, and anything else that's been added to the plants or the soil will run off with that water. So the thing you have to worry about is when it runs off, if that's real soil, they're about 4 tons per year per acre is washed away in this type of erosion. And so that's why we don't want to do that. We want our soils to be live and biologically active. And so what happens with this type of water and rain coming onto our soils, here's a wet spot here, if we scrape that back and just take off the top surface, it's really sticky on top, but if you notice, it's still very dry underneath. So we didn't get much infiltration of our water. And so that's where our roots are, but we don't have any water down there. So if we don't have infiltration, the water sits on top and evaporates really fast. And so that's how we get drought conditions, because the water is just sitting on top and evaporates as soon as the sun hits it. And so our plants have no water in the root zone. So now let's look at our bread. And basically I had some water left, and I measured the same amount of water for the bread. And now we're going to dump the water on the bread through our rainfall simulator. And so it's going to rain on there, and it's soaking in. And so a living soil acts like a sponge. We're going to let a little more of that soak in there. And you can see that it's kind of spongy. It's still taking water. There's a little bit left in there. And I'll dump that in so you can see how much. Okay, so I'm just going to add this to it. And even with that amount of water, there is still no water in the plate other than a few splashes. And you can see it's all soaked in. Now, if I were to hold that up, that bread would drip out water. And in fact, here's some on the back of the plate that did drip out from holding it up. So where is that water coming from? That's from our infiltrated water. And so that means it's going down to the plant roots. And then eventually, as gravity pulls it down further, it will go into our aquifers and fill them up. So just wanted you to think about that a little bit, that when you have a living soil, it's a sponge and it'll hold more water. So you won't drought out when everybody else is using soil like this for their plants, and they get wilted. So there's nothing left for anybody to eat. So just you want to have plants in your soil, and if the roots are full of water, then your soil has water and moisture, and therefore your plants can convert energy into the sunlight into energy, and then they can send that down to the roots. And we're going to talk about roots here in a minute. And when your moisture level is optimum, your plants actually will shade the soil and keep the soil at a optimum growing temperature. And that's about 55 to 65 degrees. And if it's hot outside, the soil can heat up quite fast when there is no canopy over the soil. So I'll move this all out of the way. I hope that's informative, and it's just to give you something to think about when you see bare soils all winter long. And now, okay, I'm gonna share my screen, and unfortunately I lost that a minute ago. And now I will share slides, and I hope, oh, sorry. Can you hear me, Patrick?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Do I need to do I need to share it for you? I've got your.
I've got them. I can go ahead and advance them. I just wanted to make sure everybody could still hear that.
Yeah.
Okay. So what is regenerative agriculture, and why should you try it? Basically, soils plus humans equal climate change. So that's where a lot of the regenerative ag topics have hit. It mostly comes into play with climate change, but you can you could see, well, let me get this set up here. Sorry. Here we go. All right, so that's why they're calling it regenerative, is because the way that we treat the soil and feed the soil helps it sequester carbon. And that's why it's kind of a hot topic. So let's move on. Here's the,
Susan,
yes.
we can't, or at least I can't see your talk. I don't know if it's.
Ah, okay.
No, no.
Let me see. Let me go back to.
It's not showing up on the screen.
Okay. Okay, I see what I did. Sorry about that.
There we go. Now we see a computer screen.
Yay. Sorry, this is my first one of these webinars, so I'm learning too. Let's see if that'll do it. How's that?
Yep, we can see it now.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll go on to that. And this is explanation through that, or the definition of regenerative agriculture that Regeneration International uses. And you can see their website down here. Regenerative agriculture describes farming and grazing practices that, among other benefits, reverse climate change by rebuilding soil organic matter and restoring degraded soil biodiversity, resulting in both carbon drawdown and improving the water cycle. So those are some pretty important things as we look at climate change. And I just wanted you to see that definition. And then I wanted to reintroduce myself and let you know that I work for Lincoln University and I'm in the Innovative Small Farmers Outreach Program, but I'm also a sheep rancher. So I feel your pain when we were talking about parasites and things like that, but there's a lot of things you can do to improve your soil, thus improve your plants, thus improve your animals. So even if you don't believe that there is climate change, I thought that most of us could find some common ground in looking at depleted soils. So most farmers complain about depleted soils, but how does it really happen? So these are three of the top ones: tillage, synthetic inputs, and continuous grazing plus overgrazing. So it's these, I'll talk about each one of these a little bit. So in tillage, it's been going on since man decided that he didn't want to chase his meat every day and he wanted to plant a few plants and figured out how to grow some grains. So tilling, when we do that, wakes up the bacteria. And when bacteria wake up, they're hungry. And so they want to eat the glomalin, which is a little superbiotic glue that holds all the aggregates together in the soil. And so when they eat the glomalin, then there's a die-off of that product and it releases nitrate. So that's how you get lots of weeds, and the nitrate is feeding your weed seeds. So you get a nice little sprout of weeds all over your garden or your pastures if you till them. Synthetic inputs, the reason why they're so hard on our soils is because they're indiscriminate killers. So if you have an herbicide, that's going to kill plants, whatever the herbicide touches. And if it's, there's broadleaf herbicides and then there's grass herbicides. So there's different kinds, but they're there to kill back or have a dieback of that green growth. Insecticides kill, they don't just kill one or two bugs, they kill anything that they usually come in contact with. And then fungicides will kill off the fungi in and on your soils, and we'll find out that that's detrimental too. And then chemical fertilizers weaken your natural resources. And so the things that naturally fertilize your soils sometimes just stop producing because they are not going to be competing with whatever the chemical fertilizer is. So you have a weakened resource there. And then there's continuous grazing or overgrazing, which this picture shows both. That's when the grass is short, the roots are short. So therefore they can't really hold much for the soil. And that's how you get erosion in a lot of cases. And we'll talk more about this in a minute. So glomalin is that little sticky stuff, that superbiotic glue. And we know now since the 1990s that glomalin is a glycoprotein produced abundantly on hyphae and spores of the arbuscular mycorrhizae fungi in the soil and in the roots. And a woman discovered this. She was working for the Agriculture Research Service under the USDA in the 90s, and her name is Sarah F. Wright. I think I would like to meet her, but basically she's proven that mycorrhizae need glomalin and glomalin need mycorrhizae, and that's how this all works. It's a very nice symbiotic relationship. And so we get into how the roots act when all this is very biological. And all those little particles, those that are called aggregates in soil, when you have really good biologically active soils, those aggregates look like basically like cottage cheese. There be a lot of little lumps, and they're kind of stuck together in little groups. And then those aggregates need the exudates, which is the shiny stuff on the root hairs, and that is exuded from their plants. Basically, it's a sugar, and that sugar or exudate leaks out of the roots, and that is the shelter and feed and food for the mycorrhizae. And arbuscular mycorrhizae fungi, we're just going to call them mycorrhizae because they're a specialized fungus, basically. And if you look up here in this drawing, they have some of the fungal hyphae bringing nutrients into the roots. So that's the symbiotic relationship. When you have healthy soils, these fungi will actually feed and water your plants for you, so they hold that. The problem is with exudates is that they only live for about 27 days. So you want to have plenty of them so that there's not a sudden die-off, and so there's lots of generations, because that's what feeds the mycorrhizae, which are the white hairs in the photo on the left. All those little white strings, those are the mycorrhizae. And so hopefully I did this right, and we're going to watch a little less than 2-minute video of explanation of mycorrhizae from Cornell. If it'll open. There we go.
A rainstorm will leave this forest flush with wild edibles prized by chefs and collectors. Chanterelle mushrooms have a rich and unique flavor, but their most crucial function lies out of sight. Beneath the flashy fruiting bodies, microscopic threads called hyphae extend throughout the soil.
Hyphae are common to all soil fungi, most of which are free-living decomposers of dead organic matter. But the chanterelles are among the many fungal species known as mycorrhizae. They're hyphae forming a partnership with the roots of plants.
Mycorrhizae assist the roots in obtaining water and nutrients, their thin hyphae reaching into tiny crevices in the soil, as well as breaking down dead organic matter to obtain the nutrients locked inside, something that plants find difficult.
They exchange these nutrients for sugars created by the plant's photosynthesizing tissue above ground. The symbiosis greatly improves tree health, to the point where some seedlings need mycorrhizae to survive.
Far from just pine trees, almost all plants form symbioses with mycorrhizae. Mycorrhizae are extremely diverse, with some species forming intricate structures inside the very cells of the roots. They perform the same exchange of nutrients for sugars as all mycorrhizae, and, by joining multiple plants into a network, can relay messages between them.
When herbivorous spider mites start to feed on one of these bean plants, the signal goes out, prompting the other plants to ramp up defenses. The forewarned plants emit odors to attract predatory mites that devour the spider mites and protect all of the plants from further harm.
Mycorrhizae serve as a critical bridge between below-ground and above-ground ecosystems, sustaining the diversity of plants that humans and animals rely on, all the way from the biggest tree down to the smallest bean.
And we want to cancel that and that. Okay. X that out. Okay, go back. Okay, I practiced this. Can you hear me, Patrick?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. There's that. Okay. Good. I'm trying to get out of it. Sorry. There we go. Yay. So that's what your plants on the left, the mycorrhizae should, that's what plants with mycorrhizae look like. You have lots more of these white hairs. And if you don't have mycorrhizae, the picture on the right is what you get. And therefore, there's not as much food and water being resourced for the plants. So disturbance is on soil is, there's a lot of different definitions for disturbance. But if you disturb the soil, you should always try to feed it. If you disturb it, you must feed it. So the picture on the right with the tractor and the 3-bottom plow is, there's quite a lot of disturbance there because they've actually turned the soil over and opened it up to the air. So your mycorrhizae that were there will have to recolonize because you've disturbed them so much. They really don't like to be disturbed. So the less tillage you can do, the better off you are. Well, grazing is still a disturbance. But if you have a cover crop there that the cows are grazing and she's eating it, then whatever goes in must come out. And so that is how you feed it. The cow is providing manure behind what she's grazing off in the front. So these are very important to feed the mycorrhizae so they get a lot of nutrients. And when you have continuous living covers, which just means you don't leave the ground without plants in it, you should have lots of protection from those living roots. And roots can provide us with lots of free eco services because they mine up the nutrients from deep down in the soil, and they prevent erosion, and they also hold moisture. Gabe Brown, if you know who he is, he's a farmer in the Dakotas that uses regenerative practices, and he and several other of the members of the understandingag.com group have done soil surveys in the northern tiers of the United States, and they found that on average, just about 12 inches down from the surface, there was on average 4,000 pounds of nitrogen just sitting there waiting to be mined up. And on the low end of their spectrum, it was 1,000 pounds of nitrogen within the soil. So roots can be really important for mining up those nutrients for us. So we come to planting cover crops, and regenerative agriculture is all about planting cover crops. And I've done a couple of research projects on this. I did a SARE partnership grant a few years back, and we just broadcast cover crops into perennial pastures, and then we let them grow and until they were about 12 to 14 inches tall. And Then we weighed some goats and put them in the test plots, and we had a plot next to it that had no cover crops on it. It was just their standard perennial pasture. And we found out that by using cover crops, we could, on average, double our grazing days with cover crops on perennial pastures. So there's lots of interesting things you can do with cover crops. They do provide varying lengths. So if we have goats, they want to eat with their head up, so we want to have tall plants. And so if you have tall plants, then you have long roots. Your roots tend to match or do better than the height of the plant. Cover crops can help us feed the biology in the soil as well. And like we said before, prevent erosion, and they hold moisture. But something that's really important is that they prevent high temperatures in the soil because of the canopy of the plants that protects the soil from getting too hot. And in summertime, when the temperature is 90 to 100 degrees, the soil temperature can be almost 90 degrees by itself, and it should be between 55 and 65 in order to keep plants growing and fruit coming on vegetables. Because if it gets hotter than that, the flowers will drop and then you won't get any fruit. So cover crops can do a lot of things for us. Then I was researching more about cover crops and found out that this Dr. Gleisman uses the fist method. So if you are tilling, he talks about the frequency of disturbance. And remember, we talked about the disturbance. If you disturb it, you have to feed it. So his answer to that is to not till very often, maybe once every 4 years. And then you would want to use some very shallow tillage, like vertical till, and maybe just removing the weeds from the surface and then planting. And then never plant or never till up more than a portion of your farm at one time. And then the timing of the disturbance, you can try and work around weeds or wait until there's lots of ways to do it. He talks about tilling in the winter so that the microbes don't eat all of your glomalin. So we don't want the soil glue to go away. We want it to stay there and serve us and keep our soil intact. So now all of that, does anybody have any questions about that? Because now we can really talk about grazing. Anybody have any questions, Patrick?
I'm looking here. Broadcast cover crops and permanent pasture cause any reduction in production of the perennial grass the next year? I guess this is a question. Broadcasting cover crops and permanent pasture, like, cause any reduction in the production of the perennial grass the next year?
I haven't seen any studies on that. What it does help do is kind of wakes up your soil, because if you have a perennial pasture, pretty much your roots are all the same length across the board, across your pasture. So you're not getting the benefit of the new nutrients that you could mine up and actually feed that grass to be better. So that's what you're looking for. And it takes about 3 different plantings before you start seeing lots of your cover crop. You'll see sprigs of it here and there on the first and second plantings, but about the 3rd and 4th plantings, then you'll start really seeing more of the cover crops. So if that is just one way to kind of wake up your pastures and get the soil more active.
Here's a couple of questions. And so how do you overcome NPK deficits without causing damage? And then what's some examples of cover crops?
Okay, so we shouldn't we shouldn't have any damage on NP and K. What was the first part of that question again?
Just how to overcome NP and K deficits without causing damage.
Oh, okay. So I don't think it'll ever cause any damage. The deficits should mitigate themselves because the cover crops are going to give you a lots of different varying lengths of roots, and therefore they're going to go down past that root zone of your common pasture plants and mine up those nutrients that you do need. So then plus if you graze over it, you're going to have manure and urine on the pastures, and that's going to help fertilize it from the top. So basically, if your pastures are stagnant or there's no living biology in your root zone, that's why it looks like there's a deficit of NP and K. But other than that, it's still there. It's just down deeper, and you have to get those roots working to bring the nutrients up.
Some examples of cover crops.
Okay, examples of cover crops. Okay, so I use a lot of sorghum Sudan and mung beans. We'll use some clover in there. Sometimes some lespedeza, depending on what we're doing. And there's so many other ones that are possible. You can even use corn if you want to and mix it into your mix. I've also used buckwheat. Those are some summer ones. Then for winter, oats and turnips and radishes, like daikon radishes or forage radishes. Austrian winter peas are a good one. And there's several combinations, lots of combinations. If you would get the book from SARE, SARE.org, that is called Managing Cover Crops, and you can download that for free on their website. Then you get into the charts of what cover crops can do for you. And the more mixtures that you have, the more success you will have in getting results. Is there any other questions?
Yeah, well, somebody typed something in, but I'm not for sure what they're asking.
Patrick, I think it's ag lime.
Okay, yeah, that probably makes sense. Is ag lime a reasonable additive?
I think it can be. You got to remember that it's going to take about 18 months for it to actually activate. So if you're just needing calcium, then there's a lot of plants that can provide that. So there's other ways to do it, but ag lime can also help dry the soil and make it more usable, soluble. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with that, but you just have to think about how long it's going to take before it activates. So if you need something to happen faster, you're probably better off planting a cover crop that can help with that. So
I don't see any other questions right now.
all right, so we've got everybody excited about cover crops, I hope. So let's move on to grazing. All right, you've seen this picture before. This is not grazing. This is overgrazing and continuous grazing. And if you look at this photo, there's a lot of cows under that big tree. And that was taken in May of 2016. And notice the pond over here on the left. It's starting to get a little muddy around the edges, and maybe it's receding a little bit. Well, so then about 2 years later, after I took this picture, the farmer cut this tree down. I asked him about that, and he said that the roots were sucking all the water out of the pond. And so I didn't ask too many more questions after that. But then I took another picture in October of this year, and this is what it looks like now. It's a little wider angle. The blue line delineates where the other picture ended. If you can look at that, see where the edge of the pond is. That's about where the line is. And the X is where he cut down the tree. And then I made a wider picture because I wanted to show you the gully that is right here. There's a hill off to the left of this photo, and the pasture is as short as this is. And so it has been basically washing away soil because it's on a slant, on a slope. And all of that soil has come down here and silted in this pond. So now there's no water in it. And in 4 years, that's what happened. So, and I know you got to trust me on the dates on that, but I looked back at that photo and couldn't believe it. And this summer, those cows have had no water in that pond at all. And this farmer feeds hay year round because he has to. So that's not a very good example of grazing, but those cows are out there all the time. Here is a very good example of grazing, and there's the Sericea lespedeza that Jean was talking about. And this is on Greg Judy's place. I took this picture when I had the privilege to go there one year. And those are his South Pole cattle. And his pastures are rarely shorter than that. He only allows the cattle to eat the top 1/3 of the plant, and then they are moved out of there to a new paddock. And I think there was about 80 head in there. So those cows are pretty happy. There's not a lot of mooing. There's not a lot of switching of tails. The flies were there was very few flies because the manure does not get concentrated. And so these cattle were extremely happy and could just graze to their heart's content. And there was a lot of plants that Greg Judy said he never planted because the soil was live and active. It brings up a seed bed that he could get for free because it was there. So those cows eat pretty well. They're always at least belly deep in forage. Oh, went too far. Here's some goats that were grazing on one of my projects. They're actually browsing because goats like to eat with their head up. And so here was some of that sorghum Sudan. We also had some buckwheat in there, some clover, and I think we had some peas as well, or mung beans. But those goats enjoyed being in that paddock a lot. And they gained about 1.5 pounds grazing that paddock. And that was part of the test, was to put some goats in on big tall cover crops like this, and then the rest was fescue perennial pastures. And so we had goats in on there, and those two, and they did not gain that much. I think they only gained like 0.4 pounds. So keeping them happy and they can browse with their head up, they like that a lot. Now, I could show you this picture because these are my sheep, and this was early in my grazing career. This you should not do. You shouldn't have them on stemmy pastures that have no base grass, and you shouldn't let it get down this short. Like Jean was talking about, we don't want our forages to get shorter than about 6 inches, because those parasites can climb up 3 to 4 inches high while the dew is on the grass and on the forage. And so if your forage is short, basically you're feeding parasites back to your animals. So you don't want to ever let it get this short and this sparse. This was kind of some edges around some bean fields, and I think he might have sprayed it before I got there, but I left him on there a little too long. So live and learn, and that is one thing you can do with regenerative grazing and regenerative agriculture, is that it's a very forgiving system. And so if you make mistakes like this, you can get them off of here and get to a better pasture pretty quickly, and you can still improve the soil. And that way the plants will be better too. But don't let it get shorter than 6 inches. So when we're grazing, we want to also include a rest period, because if you graze your pastures, if you don't graze them down enough, you'll start getting woody plants and seed heads, and you'll probably see a higher bacteria count as opposed to bacteria to fungi, because in a pasture it should be almost 50-50 on your bacteria to fungi. And there's lots of new ways to test this, and you can get on-farm tests to know whether your bacteria and your fungi are balanced out. And if you'd like to know more about that, I can help you find that information and those tests, which are between $8 and $15 a piece. Also, we don't want to overgraze our pastures, because like the pictures where those poor cows were standing under the tree, overgrazing basically is detrimental to your grass. And the parasites, when they're not on the stems of grass, are down in the crowns of the grass. That's where they live, so that they're protected from the sun. So if you're letting your animals eat down to the crowns, not only are you introducing parasites back into your animals, but you are hurting the crowns of the grass, and short grass equals short roots. The roots will slough off. So you need to keep your grasses at least 6 inches or taller. And then we also want to remove our livestock for 30 to 45 days in the grazing season until the points grow back, until the tips grow back on our grass, so that basically it is at the right maturity and the right height for grazing, so that it will protect the plant and it'll come back again, and we can graze it probably another time, or we can use it for stockpile in the winter. And stockpile is pretty important, but if you don't plan for it, you won't have enough and you'll be feeding hay all winter. I would prefer to graze as long as I can in the winter. And another thing about short plants, we were talking about how tall, we don't want to let them get shorter than 6 inches, but if the plants are shorter than 3 inches, they usually have no leaves, so they cannot collect any solar energy. And so when that happens, they cannot create glomalin for the mycorrhizae. And so you can have a problem with your plants regrowing, because now the roots are not only short, but they are going to be, the temperature will rise in that top few inches of soil, and it will be very difficult for the plant roots to collect nutrients. And the mycorrhizae don't like it when it's hot either, so they're going to go away. So you have to be really careful about overgrazing. Now, there are some people who can use overgrazing as a tool, and as long as you use it as a tool and not a rule, you can actually get your animals to graze it down really short, And just before you put them in there, you're going to spread your cover crop seeds. And then you let your animals come in, shorten the grass way short. And by them being in there grazing it so short, they're going to trample those seeds into the soil so that you have a good soil to seed contact. And that's pretty important when you're trying to get new pasture established or wake it up with cover crops. So like I said, you're going to probably have to deworm them because you're letting them graze the crowns of the plants. But as long as you do that use it as a tool and not a rule, you know, a lot of times, you know, when your animals are going to need to be dewormed, you start seeing some thin ones and maybe some with some high DAG scores. So you can let them graze that down short so you can get your cover crop to grow a little faster and get a little more light on it. But like I said, as a tool, not a rule. So cover crops can really help us with biodiversity. So if we have a good mixture of cover crops, that's a biodiverse mixture or a cover crop cocktail. And if we have biodiversity in our plants and our subterranean creatures, our little livestock in the soil, then we are creating resiliency on our pastures and in our soil. So resilient soil will pay us back in free eco-services. And I don't know about you, but I like free. So planting a diverse cover crop and mixing in with perennial pastures and getting those roots to work for you and mine up nutrients, that can be very helpful. So some of the free eco services are the mycorrhizae fungi feeding your plant roots, and they are bringing food and water to your plants. And then the roots are mining up the plant available nutrients, not just nutrients, but that's actually available to the plants. And then of course your water and your nutrient cycle are actually working for you. And when that's working, you're not going to suffer from drought very often. And another thing that helps us is that when we have nice tall pastures, we're inviting predator insects and pollinators into our pastures. So because we've provided them with a food source and habitat. So if the bad bugs do come, the predator insects are already there and they can work on getting rid of the bad bugs. So I believe there's like 16 or 17 good bugs to every one bad bug. So those are pretty good odds, and a free eco service that just by having nice pastures, you'll have predator bugs available. And you're also, the other free eco service is you're lowering the risk of parasite reinfestation of your livestock. And when you have abundant plant life and healthy plant life, you'll have healthy livestock. So going forward, what can you do? What can you actually do to jump in and get started? Well, there's lots of things you can do. And some of those are frost seeding some winter hardy seeds over snow. And that's if you wanted to get started like right now. You could wait until the next snow or just put some winter hardy seeds out and go ahead and broadcast them over perennials. And while your soils are gaining biological activity, they may not quite be up to par for your animals. So you might want to go to a better mineral mix because minerals, when you have them in the right amounts, will help us prevent foot rot, foot scald, organ issues like calculi in the urinary tract. We can help the skin be better to protect the animal. You won't have nearly the fly problems. And so when we use a mineral that is more than 30% salt, we're limiting mineral intake. So I would suggest that you use minerals that either have 30% or less of salt or no salt. And that can be expensive, but you're going to have less medical problems with your animals because they have all the minerals that they need. I've been looking at Jerry Brunetti mineral mixes, and Jerry Brunetti was a master formulator for minerals for any kind of livestock and for humans. So he knows a lot about minerals. Unfortunately, he's passed away, but he had published several books, so you might want to read up on those. And I usually feed my salt separately, and I like the gray salt so that there's already some minerals in that salt. There's still minerals in them, I should say, because they're not overly refined like white salt. I also put out some baking soda for my sheep, and I use that as a rumen buffer. So that if they do overindulge on some of these new plants that they're not used to, they have something to settle their stomach. But the other thing you can get from using baking soda, it is another form of salt, but also if they are jumping in and just eating baking soda, that's probably another sign that they are low on minerals. So you might want to just try it, and you can still get rumen buffer in the 50-pound sack, which is a lot cheaper than buying it in the little box. Other things you can do to go forward are using cover crops, planting them just to improve your perennial pastures, but also to use them when you're going to lay your cash crop fields fallow for the winter. That's not very good. We're losing too much topsoil, and a lot of it happens in the winter just from wind erosion, let alone rain and water erosion. So cover crops can really help us fill that gap from summer to spring the next year. Also, you can plant pollinator strips so that you're bringing in pollinators and predators to help your crops. But another thing you can do is use flowering cover crops. And some of the flowers, sunflowers is another summer plant that I use in cover crop mixtures. And they're pretty amazing to see nice sunflower plants out there. And the sheep and goats love them. Cows will eat them as well. The whole plant is edible. And you can graze it before it has a flower head, or you can graze it as it has a flower head. They love it all. So that also will help your cover crop, your pollinators come in, and your predator bugs. So they can be beautiful and important to you. And also I try to plant my summer mixture at the end of winter and my winter mixes at the end of summer. So for me in the Kansas City region of Missouri, end of winter is about February, and end of summer is about the middle of August for me. So you'd have to adapt that to your area. Also, don't let your fields lay fallow. Interplant your cover crops into your cash crops before you harvest the cash crop. You'll have more roots in the ground, more retained moisture, and the temperature of the soil is more steady. So those are some things you can do to jump in and get started with regenerative practices. And here's something I've done and is now kind of becoming.
Susan?
Yes, go ahead.
We did have a question. What winter hardy seeds would you recommend for central Missouri?
You can use oats. You can use spring and winter oats. I would plant both in the fall so that they help each other. And oats are really good at creating more biology. Wheat, you could plant wheat, but wheat is allelopathic and basically kind of prevents other plants from coming up around it. It likes to shoot out a little toxin that prevents other things from growing. So I would say oats and Austrian winter peas. And let's see, what else did we put out? We put out some other, I think I added some clover in there and also some radishes and turnips. They're a forage turnip and a forage radish. So there's a nice big leafy head. You still get a tap root, which helps your soil open up a little more. But
Use any rye or anything?
Yes, rye is another one. That's a good one. Mix them up, mix them together. Don't use just one. Is there any other questions?
I don't see any right now.
Okay. So if you're wondering, we'll get on with this crazy picture. If you're wondering how you can tell if your soil is becoming more biologically active, you can take the Soil Your Undies challenge. And if you can Google it, I know you want to. You take a pair of white cotton briefs and you dig down about 3 inches and you lay the cotton briefs down flat and bury them back with soil. And in about 60 to 80 days, you will have nothing left but the elastic and a few strings if your soil is very biologically active. So here they're showing you the dug up result. And they probably didn't wait 60 days because it's just, it's not really too deteriorated. It's only partially deteriorated. So that's a fun way to see if your soils are becoming active. So basically, as long as you have soil resiliency and you can get free eco services, don't even worry about climate change because your farm is going to thrive on active biological soils that will sequester carbon and feed your tiny livestock in the soil, as well as your terrestrial mammals and ruminants. So I hope that you'll try that. And if you need more information on it, please contact me. I'd be happy to help. There are some of the resources I use to make this presentation. And biologically active soil is healthy soil. So I want to thank you for listening today. And there's my contact information. Did you have any questions?
Don't have any right now. Are there any questions for Susan? I don't. Nobody's typing anything in. So did I see?
Okay.
Oh, well, somebody said great information, Susan. So
Thank you.
So anyway, yeah, I want to thank Susan and thank Jean tonight for speaking, and we're about we're a little early actually. I think.
Yeah,
I think that's
so.
always good.
Yeah.
Oh, here's a question. Late for planting now, when to start? I think would say I would guess right now it's a little late for planting your I think what they're getting at here is a little late right now to plant your falls or your
Right.
your basically your winter annuals.
Right.
And I know that when you get into like you mentioned oats. That's one that, and we can even frost seed our clovers and stuff. And that usually after the first of the year, or like oats or something like that. That would be like in February, I think, is when we would probably start planting a lot of those things.
Right.
January,
Yeah.
February timeframe.
And if you want to just try something, throw some clover out. Clover is very forgiving because it's got a real hard shell on the outside. And you can put it out on snow, right on top of the snow when it's starting to melt. And as the snow melts, it will actually bring that seed down to soil contact, and it'll be ready to go with the first warm up. So, but other than a mixture of annuals, winter annuals, they do need to be winter hardy. But I usually start planting those for my area right about the middle of August, around a rain event. When it's getting ready to start raining. Usually we get rain about the first week of August, the last week of July, first week of August, and then it usually waits till about the third to the fourth week of August. So if you can kind of plant it in the middle there, it'll have plenty of time to start. It'll be up tall, anywhere from 6 to 10 inches by the time we get a heavy frost. And some of it will winter kill, but that's also a good thing for the soil because that dieback will feed your soil biology. So we want roots in the ground, living roots, and we want a little bit of dry plants that can fall down into the soil and feed the biology. So there's always a time to do it. For spring, I usually wait till about the end of February, and there's a pretty good window in there when there's gonna be rain. So those summer annuals, you can plant them then, and they do really well.
Some of your summer annuals, though, you're mentioning summer annuals, you want to go a little bit later, like your Sudans and some of those others.
Well, if you're doing them in a mix, they actually, you already have cover on the ground because of your perennial pastures. So they're pretty well protected. Now, if you're just planting them out on open soil, yeah, you got to wait till that soil is warmed up. Anybody else?
I don't see any other questions right now. So anyway, oh, wait a second. I know no-till is best. Will broadcast work?
Yes, indeed. I have done that on 2 different projects now, and broadcasting on top of perennial pastures works great. You don't see a lot of the plants because the soil is basically not awakened yet to having all these different plants in it. But by the 3rd time you plant, that you'll be able to see lots of them there. And I just use broadcasters, planters. Another time I tried broadcasting and then turning animals in to trample it in and graze off the original plants, which opens up your canopy for sunlight for your new plants. So there's lots of ways to do it, and seems to work. It's, you're not going to see it won't look the same as if you drilled it in. So you have to kind of change your expectations, but it does work.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any more right now. I guess I'll thank Susan and Jean tonight for the meeting and the presentation, and just thank everybody for being on tonight. Again, I emailed you a link to an evaluation. If you please fill that out, get that back to me here pretty soon. Actually, it's anonymous, and you just fill it out, and it sends it back to me, and it's works just really good. But if you'd go through that and fill that out for me here next few days, get that back to me. That'd be really good. And again, thanks Susan and Jean for the presentation tonight. And if you have any questions or anything, need any more information, just send us an email or a call. You should be receiving here. Gene, any thoughts on diatomaceous earth in goat feed?
Yeah, from what I've been able to find, I don't know that that's particularly beneficial, especially from a parasite control standpoint.
Yeah, I would have to agree. Diatomaceous earth is not really meant to be taken internally by ruminants. And so your best bet is to use it wherever you have wet spots. Use it to help dry out the soil so that they're not getting recontaminated from the plants that they might get a hold of in a wet spot. There's a lot better ways to use diatomaceous earth than that.
Okay. I think we'll call it an evening. Thank you all for being on. Please try to fill out the evaluation here in the next few days, and I should be sending you, or you should be receiving a video of the meeting tonight. And so if you have any questions or anything, just let us know, either email us or give us a call. And again, thank you for being on, and thank you, Jean and Susan, for the nice presentations tonight. So,
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Everybody have a good evening.
Yep. Thanks. See you later.
Good night.